I'm joined now by Jake Barnett from the Wespath Sustainable Investment Stewardship team. Jake, welcome.
Happy to be here.
So Jake, you and other members of the SIS department got a chance to see a number of long-term collaborators and peers in the fourth quarter. Can you share some of the places that you visited and how each location connected to your work at Wespath?
Sure, Joe. Happy to. I spent much of the month of November on the road, starting with attending the Conference of Party, or COP, climate talks in Egypt. At COP, I was representing Wespath alongside other agency partners. John Hill from Church and Society and Jenny Phillips from Global Ministries were there with me in person the first week, and then Ilka Vega from United Women in Faith also attended the second week of the conference. After that, I went to Munich, where I met Patrick Para, a long-term collaborator with whom I co-lead the engagement track of the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance. I then went the following week to London to meet with multiple asset managers of Wespath and faith-based collaborators, including UK counterparts from the Central Finance Board of the Methodist Church. I finished my work tour across the Atlantic with a visit to PRI in person in Barcelona. My colleague Ryan McQueenie also attended and spoke on a panel at the Responsible Investor Conference in New York. But there wasn't quite enough room on the slide to fit that too.
And so Jake, what were the main takeaways from seeing so many of our strategic partners in person?
So at a high level, I would say one of the most valuable parts of this trip was deepening relationships with so many close collaborators. I started at Wespath about 3 years ago in January of 2020. So my first couple of years on the job were almost entirely virtual collaboration. We were able to get a lot of meaningful work done in this time. For example, Patrick and I wrote our flagship paper, The Future of Investor Engagement, without ever having met one another. However, this trip really reinforced the value of personal connection and in-person collaboration as a crucial means of building trust and generating new ideas.
And so Jake, so what were some of the specifics of each trip that stuck out for you?
Moving in chronological order, at COP, it was enlightening to witness in person some of the competing different priorities of stakeholders when it comes to climate action. For example, it was powerful to hear the compelling moral case being made by Pakistan, which had just experienced devastating flooding earlier that year. The Pakistani representatives shared how the impacts of these events would not be confined to their country, including a slogan, "What happens in Pakistan doesn't stay in Pakistan." Long-term attendees of COP also talked about how developed markets like the US would have little credibility as negotiators when asking emerging markets countries to wean off fossil fuels without fulfilling their own commitments to provide climate finance, which in the UN context is providing funding to help with adaptation and mitigation in emerging markets. However, in sitting in a session with US negotiators, it became clear how complex it is to fulfill these commitments. Funding climate finance in the UN context is the remit of Congress, and Congress doesn't currently have support for such budgetary line items, especially given potential recession fears and bipartisan gridlock. Despite this gridlock, one clear point I heard in another private session was the need for clear signals and policies from government that would enable and build momentum for climate action within the financial sector. All of this complexity made me grateful to be attending this conference with colleagues John and Jenny. The ability to hear their nuanced perspectives and to debrief the days with them was certainly a highlight of the conference for me. You can find recordings of 2 webinars where we shared perspectives alongside Ilka Vega on the Wespath website in terms of our experiences at COP.
And Jason, what about the next couple of weeks in Europe?
Next, I went to Munich to spend time working in person with the aforementioned Patrick Para. My time with Patrick was primarily spent planning for the year ahead, so I will leave updates on any projects there until we get them a little bit further along. Next was a trip to London, where I met with 3 of Wespath's asset managers based in the UK, Schroders, Baillie Gifford, and Mondrian. I also met with a number of long-term collaborators, with special thanks to partners from Church of England, Adam Matthews and Stephen Barry, who treated me to a traditional Thanksgiving dinner consisting of delicious Italian in downtown London. The last stop in London was attending the World Energy Capital Assembly, convening of leaders from the oil and gas and investor communities. Patrick and I were invited to speak to a panel of executives about the ideas contained in the Future of Investor Engagement, And it was great to address this non-traditional, non-sustainable investment-oriented audience. One enlightening reoccurring theme that was shared by members of the oil and gas community was a recognition that many of the headwinds of further investment in oil and gas were due to traditional financial concerns from investors rather than climate concerns, just reinforcing that investors remain concerned most often primarily about the bottom line. Finally, I ended up attending the conference of one of Wespath's key strategic partners, the UN Principles for Responsible Investment. After starting from relatively humble beginnings of just a few signatories, including Wespath, PRI now represents over 5,000 signatories, managing or advising on over $100 trillion in assets. However, with this big tent comes the difficulty of serving the needs of the diverse community. As a panel speaker and in hallway discussions, I encouraged PRI to continue to lift up asset owner voices when it comes to engaging our managers to align interests in terms of long-term systemic economic health. PRI established a working group on this topic after the conference, so hopefully we'll have more to share on that soon.
And Jake, it wasn't just you traveling from your team in Q4, was it?
No, it wasn't. My colleague Ryan McQueenie also attended the Responsible Investor Conference in New York, where he spoke on a panel. You can see a debrief from Ryan on Wespath's social media platforms about that conference experience, but key sentiments expressed included gratitude for meeting people in person and a reaffirmation of Wespath's status as a sustainable investment leader. And that concludes our Q4 travel.
So Jake, thanks for joining me today, and thanks for the update on your journey.
Happy to do so.